That night, my wife stared at my mother's gift like it was an insult laid out for her. We were sitting in a place off North Scottsdale Road, and I felt my jaw unclench for the first time in years. Then Tamsin's smile clicked into place. Instant, practiced, and I knew dinner had shifted into something else. My name was Hollis Ward. I was 31. Tamsin and I were on our second anniversary, October 14th, still crammed into a one-bedroom and calling it temporary while I tried to build my life. My mother, Blythe Ward, picked us up for dinner like she was walking into negotiations. Polite smile, sharp eyes, no small talk. Tamsin sat straight, voice sweet, like she was pitching a client. After dessert, Mom slid a small velvet box across the table to me, not to Tamsin. "I'm tired of watching you burn money on rent," she said. "You're trying to build a life." Inside were 2 brass keys and a gate fob for a gated community called Saguaro Crest. A note in her handwriting said, "Occupy it, take care of it, breathe." I felt relief so sharply I almost laughed. Mom watched Tamsin while I turned the keys in my palm. She didn't ask for gratitude. She said, "It's empty right now. Stay there, keep it clean, and don't make it complicated while I finish the paperwork." Her tone said it wasn't a suggestion at all. I expected Tamsin to hug my mom, or at least hug me. This was the first time in 2 years I thought we might stop bracing for every bill and setback. Instead, her face went tight, then sweet, then tight again, like she was picking an expression the way she picked table settings. In the car, she said, "So your mom bought us a leash." I tried to calm it down. "She's helping us," I said. Tamsin's eyes stayed on the road. "It's control," she said. "You're trained to say yes to Blythe." I stepped between the 2 reactions and tried to sand down both sides, as if wording mattered more than what she meant. My mother handed us a way out of rent, and my wife treated it like a trap. Back at the apartment, Tamsin kicked off her heels and put the keys on the counter like they were dirty. "If you move us into Blythe's house," she said, "you'd better be ready to live under Blythe's rules." I followed her into the bedroom, keeping my voice low. "It's just a place to breathe," I said. She didn't answer. She scrubbed off her makeup with hard swipes and climbed into bed without looking at me. I lay down, stared at the ceiling fan, and told myself it was stress and pride, not a warning. The room still felt hostile. I turned off the lamp and faced the wall. Sleep finally grabbed me, and I tried to pretend the fight was over. Around 1:40 in the morning, I woke up thirsty, and I heard Tamsin in the kitchen, talking low on her phone like she was hiding from me, not just trying not to wake me. I stepped into the hallway and held still. The kitchen stayed dark except for the glow of her screen, and her voice had that careful, excited edge I hadn't heard in a long time. "The house is huge. We move tomorrow. Master suite is yours," she said. And she laughed, soft and quick, like she was sharing a secret with somebody she trusted. Then she said a name that wasn't mine and wasn't Blythe's. "Ardith, you're going to love it," she whispered, and I lost my breath for a second. Ardith Vale was her mother, the woman who treated every favor like a bill due on demand. And Tamsin sounded like she was handing her the keys already. I didn't storm in there, even though every part of me wanted to. I backed off and told myself I had misheard, that it was just talk, even while dread settled in. I backed into the bedroom, slid under the covers, and waited until Tamsin came back and acted like she'd been asleep the whole time. In the morning, I got up early and moved fast because if I stayed, I was going to blow up. "I've got errands to run," I said while I dressed, and Tamsin answered with a lazy, sweet, "Okay, babe," like nothing happened. I really did have a claims file to drop off, but mostly I was running from a fight I didn't feel ready to have. By noon, she texted me 3 bland updates about unpacking and meeting HOA. None of them mentioned Ardith, and none of them mentioned a moving truck, which made the omission hard to ignore. When I pulled into Saguaro Crest, a dented white cargo van sat across my driveway like it had been parked there all its life. 2 guys were hauling in old furniture that smelled like storage unit dust, and they didn't even look at me for permission. Ardith stood near the front door directing them like a foreman, bracelets clacking, voice carrying, and she waved at me like I was late to my own job. "There you are," she called, smiling wide. Her perfume hit me before she did. "Tell them where you want my chair because my back can't do stairs." Tamsin stood beside her with a calm face and said, "This is happening. Don't make it weird." Like I was the one crossing a line. I walked into my living room and saw fresh paint and clean floors, and then Ardith's worn recliner scraped across the hardwood like the place had already been claimed. So I stepped in and grabbed the arm to stop it. The movers froze when I clamped my hand on the recliner's arm, and the legs stopped screeching across the hardwood. Ardith's smile didn't fade, but her eyes sharpened like she was picking a fight on purpose. "Careful with that floor," I said, keeping my voice low, and she acted like I'd just insulted her. She didn't even answer me in the living room. Ardith pointed down the hall and started walking like she already knew the layout. "Primary bedroom," she said, not asking, announcing. "Adults need space." Tamsin didn't correct her, and that hit me harder than anything Ardith had said. She stood beside Ardith with her arms folded, nodding like this was an agreed plan we'd talked about in private. I looked at my wife and waited for her to say, "No, Mom, that's our room." But she just tilted her chin like I was supposed to catch up. I tried to steer it into something normal before it got locked in. "Ardith, you can stay a couple nights in the guest room while you get settled somewhere else," I said, and I kept my words careful because I didn't want a scene with strangers in my doorway. Ardith laughed, loud and mean, and waved a hand at me like I was a child. "You are so sensitive, Hollis, and it is exhausting," she said. "A real man takes care of his wife's mother without whining about space." The takeover didn't look dramatic at first, which is why it worked. Within an hour, I watched designer handles get unscrewed and swapped for cheap ones Ardith pulled out of a grocery bag like it was a bargain hunt. A brand new lamp that had been staged in the living room got dragged out to the patio, and a box of Tamsin's fallback decor exploded onto the counters and shelves until the clean rooms turned into clutter. Every time I pointed at a scratch or a stripped screw, Ardith said the same thing with the same shrug. "It's just stuff, and you should be grateful," she told me, while she treated my mother's gift like a free salvage yard. Tamsin's control showed up quiet, almost gentle, and that made it worse. She'd translate Ardith's insults into concerns, then look at me like I was unstable. "She is worried you're too wound up," Tamsin said, and when I pushed back, she added, "You're imagining disrespect because you're too close to Blythe." Outside, an HOA neighbor I hadn't even met yet just happened to walk by twice. Nell Kirby slowed down both times and stared at the van, the furniture, and our open garage like she was filing a report in her head. I felt the community judging our driveway like it mattered, and Tamsin noticed it too because she immediately started performing. She snapped photos for her catering business saying, "This is new home office content," using the house as a clean backdrop while Ardith piled her junk into every empty corner. When I went to grab a pen, I saw unopened mail on the kitchen counter that wasn't ours. Late notices, vendor letters, and one thick envelope from a private lender that made my neck tighten. Some of the past due letters had names and callback numbers scrawled across the top. I held it up and looked straight at Tamsin. "Why is this here? And why is it not in your bag?" I asked, and she didn't even blink. "It's business, you wouldn't understand," she said. Then she leaned closer and added, "Stop treating every document like it needs your mother's approval." That night, I didn't even argue for the bed because the fight had already been decided without me. Ardith locked herself into the primary suite like she'd won something, and I took the downstairs guest room with my teeth clenched so tight it hurt. I lay there listening to them laugh upstairs like I was outside a party, and I pulled the blanket over my head and held my breath until my chest burned. I must have drifted off at some point because sunlight leaked through the guest room blinds and yanked me awake. I could hear Ardith upstairs, cabinets opening and closing, her voice carrying as if the house itself answered to her. I went up anyway because hiding downstairs wasn't a strategy, it was surrender. Tamsin met me in the kitchen with a mug in her hand, and that calm face she used when she was about to lay down terms. "We need house rules if we're going to make this work," she said, like she was being mature and I was the problem. Then she started listing them, tight and fast. No calling Blythe, no running to Mommy, and no questioning why Ardith was here. Ardith sat at the island like a judge, watching my reaction instead of her coffee. I told Tamsin I wanted one private conversation with my mother, just to explain the move and keep things clean. Tamsin's mouth lifted into a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. "If you do that, we're done," she said, like divorce was a button she could press to win. Ardith made a little sound in her throat like she approved, and the two of them stared at me until I looked away first. After that, Ardith treated me like an obstacle in her path. She talked over me whenever I spoke, and she kept moving my boxes like they were trash. I watched her drag a stack of my clothes and files toward the garage, and she called out to Tamsin loud enough for me to hear. "He is soft, and soft men always need their mothers." Tamsin didn't defend me, she just shrugged like it was a fair observation. The first time I tried to leave to cool off, I went to the entry table where I'd dropped my keys, and found nothing but dust and a coaster. I checked my pockets, the counter, the junk bowl by the door, and the kitchen drawer where Tamsin tossed everything, and my pulse started racing. Ardith leaned against the hallway wall and smiled like she'd been waiting for the moment. "Maybe you don't need to run around today," she said, her voice low and deliberate. That afternoon, my phone disappeared off the charger. I knew exactly where I'd left it, screened down by the outlet, and it wasn't there when I reached for it. Tamsin didn't even pretend to look shocked. "It's a reset," she said, like she was doing me a favor. "You're addicted to outside opinions, and you need to focus on our family for once." I wasn't proud of how long it took me to say it out loud, but that was the moment I finally named it. This wasn't a marriage argument, and it wasn't about feelings. It was containment. I found the house landline in the kitchen drawer and dialed my own voicemail just to hear the automated voice say my number like it still belonged to me. Then I grabbed a legal pad from my work bag and started writing dates and times, the way I did with claim files, because once I wrote something down, it stayed put. Ardith made a show of helping before dinner by changing the garage keypad code. When I tried the old one and the door stayed dead, she widened her eyes and acted surprised. "Oh, honey, I must have bumped something," she said, and Tamsin sighed at me like I was incompetent. "You probably hit the wrong buttons," she added, and I stood there flushed, listening to them recast the moment in front of me. That night, Tamsin stood at the top of the stairs and looked down like she was offering terms. "If you play nice, I'll let you sleep upstairs again," she said. And the way she said "let" made my stomach twist. I went back into the guest room, set the landline on the nightstand, and shoved the legal pad and pen deep into my work bag before I zipped it shut. I woke up on the third morning with my mouth dry and my nerves buzzing because I'd barely slept. Ardith finally left for a grocery run, bracelets clacking as she locked the door and announced she was saving us money with her coupons. The second her car rolled out, I yanked the landline from the kitchen drawer and called Blythe's office. Her assistant answered, and I said, "This is Hollis Ward, I need Blythe," before I could talk myself out of it. When my mother came on, she didn't ask what I'd done wrong or why I sounded shaky. She asked, "Are you safe?" And then, "Is anyone preventing you from leaving?" Like she was taking a report. I went quiet, and that silence told on me. "They keep hiding my keys in my phone," I said, and she replied, "Stay put. I'm coming this afternoon." Blythe showed up a few hours later in a gray sedan, and Sloan Mercer followed behind her in an HOA security truck. Tamsin opened the door with a hostess smile and planted herself in the doorway like manners could block an inspection. "Blythe, we're in the middle of settling in, so this is not a good time," she said. Then her voice hardened into attitude when Blythe didn't budge. Blythe stayed coldly polite. "It is my property and we are coming in," she said, and Sloan lifted his clipboard without saying a word. Ardith walked in while we were still by the entry, carrying grocery bags like she was strolling into a house she paid for. She saw Blythe and smiled wide. "Look who came to check on her little boy," she said, and she called me soft right in front of Sloan like she wanted it recorded. Blythe didn't argue with her insults at all. She walked room to room, noted scratches, swapped handles, and a gouged baseboard, then turned to Sloan and said, "Pull the gate and porch camera clips for these dates and times," while I read my notes off the legal pad. I didn't see every ugly moment in real time, because half the time I was downstairs trying to keep my temper from breaking loose. Later, Sloan sent the clips over, and I watched them that evening at Dorian Klein's office with my hands clenched under the table. Ardith was on video prying at a lock plate, dragging furniture like the floors were disposable, and snapping at the movers like she owned the place, while Tamsin stood nearby letting it happen. Dorian didn't get dramatic, he just laid it out. "This house is held in a residential trust," he said, "and it was not gifted the way your wife is claiming." He listed the conditions in plain language. Occupancy requirements, no liens, no third-party permanent resident, and a clean transfer timeline that hadn't completed. Relief came first, then shame, because I needed a legal structure to name what had been happening. Blythe leaned in and said quietly, "You don't have to win an argument. You just have to stop letting them define events for you." and I picked up my pen and signed Dorian's authorization form. By the time we left Dorian's office, Blythe had a folder under her arm and her phone in her hand. She didn't threaten Tamsin or warn anybody, and she didn't ask me to explain myself again. She just said, "I'm going to tighten this up," and started making calls as we walked. Over the next day, she sent letters and pulled the authorizations tied to the trust, HOA dues, utilities, and the maintenance escrow. The move-in autopay had all been bundled under the trust's management, so when Blythe withdrew approval, the house started getting treated like an account that didn't belong to anyone. Shut-off notices began showing up in our mailbox with my name on them, and Tamsin kept ripping them open like she could tear the problem away. I understood the mechanics later when the HOA notices came, with a ledger that didn't care about excuses. The dues weren't late. They were simply no longer being paid by the funding source, and the balance jumped fast. Tamsin tried to call it a glitch in front of Ardith, but Ardith's eyes kept scanning the paper like she knew the cutoff schedule. 3 days after Blythe pulled the authorization, the water pressure dropped while I was washing my hands. It went from normal to weak, and then it started spitting air. Not long after that, the electric service got disconnected because the trust account was gone, and nobody set up a replacement, and our place went dark while the rest of the block stayed lit. Nell Kirby later mentioned to Sloan that neighbors were asking if we were renters with issues, and I saw Tamsin flinch, sharp and involuntary. The second the garage door closed, she turned on me with panic in her eyes. "You made Blythe do this," she said, voice rising. "You couldn't stand on your own, so you had to sick her on me." Then the bigger hit landed, and I didn't witness it live. I found it later in the trash, a printed email Tamsin had crumpled and forgotten to hide, and it was from Keaton Briggs. The message was short and icy. Due to compliance concerns and ethical risk, they were ending her campus catering agreement under a contract clause. When I held it out, Tamsin snapped, "Put that down, Hollis, because you don't understand how contracts work." And Ardith started making calls like her life depended on it. That's when 3 men named Rafe, Milo, and Gus showed up. The same names I'd seen in those past due letters. And they didn't talk like normal vendors. They stood at the edge of the driveway looking past me toward the front door, and Ardith met them with forced laughter. Tamsin finally admitted part of the truth when she got scared. "I've been behind on vendor payments for months," she said, and her voice went thin. "My mom pushed this house grab because it was our only asset. I went to work that night and logged into my bank from my laptop because I didn't trust leaving my phone anywhere in that house anymore. An alert showed someone had tried to open a home equity file using my name, and I froze my credit using security questions instead of text codes. I clicked the final confirmation and printed the page before I let myself breathe. Printing that confirmation should have made me feel safer, but it only proved I needed protection from my own house. Tamsin didn't come at me with apologies after that. She came at me with a plan. About 2 weeks into Saguaro Crest, she decided she could bury the humiliation under a polished event. She said, "I'm doing a tasting night for corporate clients, and you're going to smile like we're thriving." Ardith treated it like a coronation the second Tamsin said it. She strutted the sidewalks, stopping neighbors and flashing her jewelry like she was running for office. "My daughter bought into Saguaro Crest," she bragged, loud enough for cameras to catch. I drove them around for rentals and trays and kept my mouth shut while Ardith called it our house, like my name didn't matter. The night of the tasting, the place looked like a photo shoot trying to hide a power outage. Generator lamps glowed in corners and candles sat everywhere because Tamsin refused to cancel, even after shut-off notices hit the door. She hired a photographer anyway and kept snapping orders at me saying, "Stand here and act happy because people are watching." She kept her own smile glued on, and I watched her jaw clench between flashes when the generator sputtered. Guests smiled too hard and pretended not to notice the dead HVAC, the waxy candle smell, and the dark hallway. Halfway through, the gate buzzer started going off non-stop, sharp and angry. Tamsin's smile twitched, and Ardith muttered, "Ignore it, we are hosting," while I watched the entry feed on a tablet. Rafe and his guys were outside demanding a talk, and later Sloan told me they tried to tailgate behind another car before security blocked them. The photographer kept shooting like the buzzer was music, and guests checked their phones like they needed an excuse. Guests started leaving early with polite excuses, and I heard an HOA committee woman, a friend of Nell Kirby's, whisper, "This is messy," like mess was contagious. The next morning, Tamsin switched from candles to paperwork. She waved a quitclaim form and said, "I transferred the house to my mom for family protection so we can stabilize." She shoved a pen at me and added, "It's just formal, and your signature makes it clean." I pushed it back and said, "I'm not signing away anything, especially not under pressure." Tamsin snapped that I was weak, then told Ardith I was defying my wife in front of her mother, like that was the crime. I didn't see the actual signing, but the lie kept moving anyway. Dorian confirmed it later with camera timestamps. Tamsin took Ardith to a strip mall notary and tried a forged signature attempt when I refused. Dorian stayed all procedure and said, "The trust makes that quitclaim meaningless, and the forgery strengthens Blythe's basis to revoke the gift process entirely." He didn't sound angry, which somehow made it worse for them. I took a photo of the form, attached it to an email, and hit send before Tamsin could get close enough to snatch my hands. After I hit send, I kept my phone tight in my hand like it could be taken again. Tamsin paced the kitchen, talking too loud to nobody, slamming drawers like noise could erase the record of what I'd just documented. Ardith drifted in and out of the hallway with that smug little look, the kind that said she thought paper was a weapon, and I didn't know how to hold one. Blythe came by the next time she said she would, and she didn't come alone. Dorian Klein walked beside her with a slim briefcase and a folder, and he carried himself like this wasn't personal, it was procedure. Tamsin saw them through the front window and moved fast, clearing the coffee table like she was setting a stage, then planting herself in the living room as if she owned the center of it. She waited until we were all standing there, then she lifted her chin and delivered the speech she'd been rehearsing. "The paperwork is already filed and my mother is staying," she said, looking from me to Blythe like she was daring either of us to blink. "If you don't like it, I file for divorce tomorrow morning." Ardith stood behind her, smug, holding up a copied document like a trophy, and I recognized the move immediately. Confuse people with paper long enough to steal momentum. Blythe didn't flinch, and that steadiness made Tamsin's confidence wobble for a second. Blythe held out her hand and asked, "Where is the original?" Then she asked, "Who notarized it?" Then she asked, "Where is the recording of the signing?" 3 calm questions, no heat, no insults, and the air in the room got tight because Tamsin didn't have clean answers. Ardith tried to laugh it off and said, "You're being dramatic," but her eyes darted to Tamsin like she wanted instructions. Tamsin's voice rose the way it always did when she felt control slipping. "Hollis is never going to be a provider if he keeps hiding behind Blythe," she said, loud enough for the walls to hear. "He waits for his mother to make every hard decision, and it's embarrassing." She pointed at me like I was a broken appliance. "You want to be a man, you stop letting her handle everything for you." Something settled in me, and I finally stopped trying to smooth it over. I looked right at Tamsin and said plain and slow, "You took my phone, and you took my keys, and you moved your mother into our bedroom." I kept going before she could cut in. "You don't get to call that marriage." Tamsin's expression shifted for a second, fear first, then anger, because the arrangement depended on me staying embarrassed and quiet. Dorian stepped forward and opened his folder like he'd been waiting for that exact moment. "Title has not transferred," he said, slow and clear, like he was speaking to a room full of people who wanted to misunderstand. "This property is held under a residential trust with conditions, and any attempted deed shift is either void or fraudulent." Ardith's smile cracked and she started to protest, but Dorian didn't argue with her tone. He just pointed at the pages and kept his voice steady. Blythe turned to Tamsin and spoke like she was closing a file. "The next step is not a fight," she said, calm enough to sting. "It is notice, revocation of the gift process, a formal demand to vacate, and security enforcement through the HOA and county procedures." Then she nodded at Dorian, and he placed the papers flat on the coffee table while I stood there and pulled my phone fully into view, screen lit and steady in my hand. After Dorian laid the papers down, Tamsin hovered over them like she could intimidate ink. Ardith kept muttering about rights and family, while Blythe stayed still, like she'd already moved on to the next step. I didn't argue anymore because every protest fed them and the filed notices did not. The demand to vacate came by courier with a timestamp, and I didn't even see the drop in person. I watched it later on the porch camera, a folder in the courier's hand, the signature captured clean like a receipt. Tamsin acted like it was bluffing, waving her copied pages and saying, "They can't do this because I filed first," like filing meant winning. Then the HOA posted a compliance warning on our front door, bright and official. And Sloan Mercer confirmed the schedule for a supervised removal in a message that didn't leave room for debate. That's when Ardith started packing fast and loud, dragging furniture like she could outrun paperwork. She shoved boxes toward the garage and barked at me to move, like I was a delivery guy blocking her route. Tamsin made call after call, pacing the kitchen with her phone pressed to her ear, but nobody picked up anymore. I could hear it in the tone she used, that tight sweetness sliding into panic, because her business world had gone cold. Rafe and his guys came back once rumors of eviction floated around. They stayed outside the gate, leaning on a truck and watching like they had all day to wait for the curb to fill. Sloan told me later they tried to tailgate in again, and security turned them around, which only made them linger longer. The whole situation was coming apart in full view of the neighborhood, and Tamsin hated that part most. 6 days later, right when dog walkers and landscapers were out, a security truck and a sheriff's unit pulled up with documents and a locksmith. The morning sun made everything look too clean for what was happening, and that contrast made my stomach twist. Nell Kirby stood on the sidewalk pretending to water plants, but she wasn't even looking at her flowers. I saw phones in hands all up and down the street, not subtle at all, because people like proof more than they like privacy. Tamsin tried one last public play the moment she saw uniforms. She cried and said, "I'm being set up and everybody knows it." And then she snapped at me without even wiping her face. "You owe my mother for everything she's done," she hissed, like she could guilt me into signing my life away at the curb. I didn't answer her because anything I said would have turned into her story. Blythe didn't gloat. She stayed inside her car with the window cracked, letting the process speak, and Dorian stood off to the side, calm as a man waiting for a meeting to start. Ardith screamed at the officers and demanded somebody call her son-in-law, and it hit me hard that she didn't even see me as a person. To her, I was a function, not a person. Someone useful on documents and convenient when she needed access. When the gate finally closed behind them and the code changed, the street went quiet in a way that felt unreal. I stood there holding my own phone again, thumb hovering like I was afraid it would disappear. And for the first time in 2 years, I made a decision without trying to keep the peace. I turned away from the sidewalk audience, walked back inside, and locked the front door with a steady hand. After I locked that front door, I stayed standing there for a minute, listening to the quiet and forcing my hands to stop shaking. I didn't call Tamsin, and I didn't send another message, because the next move had to be formal, not loud. 2 weeks after the eviction, I filed for divorce in Maricopa County and asked for a temporary order keeping Tamsin away from my accounts. Dorian handled the filings and Blythe covered his retainer so I could breathe without begging. I spent the first stretch in a cheap extended stay off Shea Boulevard because I refused to crawl into my mother's guest room like a punished kid. I showed up to work on time, kept my head down, and told people it was a housing glitch. Then I started counseling through my employer plan and stopped trying to laugh it off. Some nights I sat on that stiff bed, stared at the ceiling, and practiced saying, "No, that doesn't work for me," until it sounded normal. Mom never said, "I told you so," and that silence mattered. She changed the gate codes, replaced the broken hardware, and put the house back the way she meant it to be. Like fixing things was how she stayed steady. One Sunday she sat me at the kitchen island and said, "You are allowed to say no, Hollis." And I answered, "I'm learning," because it was the truth. I learned later from Keaton Briggs' formal letter that Tamsin's main campus catering contract ended because she listed our address as her secured headquarters, while creditors circled. The client didn't want the risk, and the dates matched every document like a stamp. Tamsin blamed my mother anyway, but blame didn't change what was filed. Rafe and his buddies stopped coming once the sheriff posted the eviction return, and the trust lawyer mailed them notice the house wasn't collateral. Ardith still tried calling me 8 times in one afternoon, and I blocked every number without listening to a single voicemail. Nell Kirby dropped a note in my mailbox later saying she was sorry for the spectacle and that security kept the video if I ever needed it, which was her version of kindness. What I did next was deliberately ordinary. I froze my credit, changed every password, and filed a fraud report for the loan application that used my signature, and the bank closed the file and sent confirmation. About 6 months later, I moved into a smaller condo in Old Town, kept the job I used to hate because routine helped, and started lifting weights with a coworker who didn't ask questions. The last time I saw Tamsin was at mediation, She walked in wearing a sharp blazer like nothing happened, and kept looking past me to see if Blythe was there. When the mediator said the house was never hers to give, her composure slipped, and I signed the final page, stood up, and walked out to my car alone without looking back. I drove home with the signed agreement in my bag, and the windows down, and the quiet no longer felt like a threat.